All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. From wherever you are, my name is Ryan Sanders. I'm the Senior Director of Product and Customer Marketing here at Keyfactor. And we are so excited to have you guys here with us as we dive into what's next for digital trust. And hint, hint, it's solving your cryptographic risks and vulnerabilities. So again, judging by the number of registrants that we had and the number of folks that are continuing to roll in, this is no doubt something that's top of mind for many of you today, whether you work hands-on with cryptography or you're just looking to better understand the role that it plays and the risks in your organization. You're definitely in the right place. Some of you may also be here because you heard the big news about Keyfactor's recent acquisition of InfoSec Global and CipherInsights, and maybe you want to learn more about what that means for you as well. So no matter the reason, we're happy that you've joined us, and we will be digging into all of that over the next 60 minutes or so. But before I get too ahead of myself, I'd love to introduce our MVPs of the hour. We've got a fantastic panel of experts with us today, starting with Ted Shorter. We've got Vince Berk, and we've also got Vladimir Soukharev. So let's start off with just some quick introductions. Ted, why don't you kick us off, and then we'll go to Vince and then Vlad.
Yeah, just to leave time for everything else, Ted Shorter, CTO at Keyfactor. I've been with this organization for almost 20 years, starting as a consulting company, and then kept seeing the same problems over and over again and built out what we do today to help solve some of those problems.
Awesome. Vince, why don't you go next?
Yeah, name is Vince Berk. I started out my career in machine learning, and then that was when nobody cared about that yet. So I spent the rest of my years in cybersecurity, and very specifically network monitoring side of cybersecurity. So that's what you'll learn about today, how CipherInsights actually take the network perspective of that. So very happy to be part of this group here, and yeah, looking forward to it, Ryan.
Very cool. And then we've got Vlad.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir. I'm the VP of Cryptographic R&D at InfoSec Global, a Keyfactor company now. And I'm a cryptographer by training, got my PhD from University of Waterloo back a while ago in cryptography, security, and privacy. I work and lead various cryptographic efforts and innovations, especially around cryptographic discovery, cryptographic agility, and the whole PQC migration, and actually actively involved in the whole PQC migration standardization process as well.
Awesome. Amazing. So yeah, we've got a lot of great perspectives here, and we'll kind of dig into each of those as we go through the conversation. But we have a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to jump right into it. So here's a quick look at what you can expect out of today's discussion. First off, we're going to just start with a little bit of background on the role of cryptography and what it does in modern IT infrastructure today. Then we're going to dive below the surface, and we're going to talk about some of those risks and vulnerabilities that often exist in cryptographic infrastructure, but often go unseen or unnoticed, and often what we refer to as cryptographic debt. And then more importantly, what that means in the context of migrating to post-quantum or quantum-safe cryptography. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with a discussion of why we've joined forces with these two leaders in cryptographic discovery, as we mentioned, CipherInsights and InfoSec Global, and how that combination of those solutions can really help you address some of those challenges that we'll talk about. So just a couple of quick notes. If you've got questions, we noticed some people have been making use of that already. It's fantastic. But don't be shy. Please make sure to make use of the Q&A feature. We may not get to them all, but we're going to try and save some time at the end for that open discussion. And then we would love some audience participation. So keep an eye out. We've got 3 poll questions coming your way throughout the session today. And we'll make sure to prompt you as those come through. All right, so let's get into it. And to set the stage, let's just talk about why we're all here in the first place. And the reality is that because cryptography is really at the heart of digital security. It's critical to how businesses operate today. And it's not loud, it's not obvious. It's, in a way, it's humble, it's quiet. It's the engine that's kind of humming faintly behind every secure connection, every digital transaction. But as organizations become more internet and network connected, the integrity of that cryptographic engine becomes even more critical. But unless, of course, you work with it every day, then it's just not something that you think about all the time. And that what that engine does is it starts to show signs of wear and tear or even failure. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But despite the fact that cryptography touches essentially every square inch of IT infrastructure, whether it's code or applications or workloads and devices. It's often treated like this black box. And Vlad, I've heard you use this analogy before. It's something that I think even many seasoned IT and security professionals prefer not to poke or prod too much. They just want to get it working, right? Without understanding necessarily how it works, or more importantly, how to manage it effectively. And for that reason, most organizations really just don't have a clear picture of where it lives, how it's being used, or whether it's even secure because it's not being governed or managed. And that really brings us to the risks, because the lack of visibility and control over cryptographic assets, things like keys and certificates, but also cryptographic algorithms, protocols, libraries, these leave organizations flying blind to vulnerabilities if they don't have that visibility. And it's often not until something breaks or shows up in an audit that it makes its way to the surface. And we'll discuss some examples of that in just a moment. But first, we want to start this segment by hearing from you in the audience. So get ready for our first poll question today. For this one, we want to know, how confident are you in your organization's ability to find and remediate cryptographic risks? And key emphasis on find, really that visibility component. And I provided just a few examples in parentheses of what those risks could look like. But your options are, you've got full confidence, you've got full visibility of all your cryptographic assets and the risks. You're somewhat confident, you have some visibility, but there are still certainly some blind spots. You're not very confident, or you're not confident at all. You don't feel like you have a clear picture of your cryptographic landscape. So we'll give it another few seconds here, but Vince or Vlad, I'd love to hear your perspective. You're having these conversations all the time. Any suspicions about where you think most of those answers are going to fall?
Well, I think one thing you should do, Ryan, is we should ask this question now, and then at the end of the webinar, we should ask it again and see if that changes.
Love it. Very true. I think as we dive into what are these risks and vulnerabilities, people are going to be thinking, I wasn't aware of that. So we'll certainly surface some of that today. But yeah, we'll give it another 10 seconds or so. So if everyone can continue dropping in your answers, looks like we've got a few coming in there. And then we will, let's close out the poll now to see what we've got.
Yep. One more thing I could add is that we're probably seeing initially some organizations thinking that they're around a 2 or 3, some confidence or limited confidence. But after they do deep crypto analysis by doing the discovery, they probably go down to 4 because they're like, wow, there's so much more than I even thought I have inside my ecosystem. Not even talking about vulnerabilities, but talking about how much cryptography is in there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we've closed out the poll. I'm not able to see the results. I'm not sure if you guys are able to. There we go.
They are.
It just came up.
Nice. So people are staying in the safe zone. Some confidence, limited confidence. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised by this. I am maybe surprised to see even 8% having complete confidence and visibility of all their cryptographic assets and risks. Yeah, maybe we'll see that number drop as we go through. I wish we did repeat that question, but appreciate everyone jumping in, and we will have 2 more poll questions as we move along. So keep an eye out for those. But now it's time to discuss what exactly are these cryptographic risks and vulnerabilities. So Vince, can you talk a bit about the common risks and vulnerabilities that you see out there? And then Vlad and Ted would love to kind of continue the conversation as well.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to kick that off, right? And this is sort of like where visibility, right? And the gift of insight is sort of the gift that keeps on giving, right? Like the moment you give someone insight into things like this, or like they all of a sudden become aware of things that they didn't realize, right? And it's the unknown unknowns in cryptography that really carry that biggest risk. So let's start out there, right? Like cryptography has been around for a long time, and it's kind of taken for granted, right? We've seen this become part and parcel of software stacks, and an encrypted byte on the network looks the same whether it's strongly encrypted or encrypted with outdated stuff, right? And so it's a little bit of a silent killer, right? If your cryptography doesn't work. So from the top, the iceberg looks like stuff's encrypted. We're in a great place, but there's a lot of sort of hidden problems that could potentially expose you and your data, right? The first one of all being unencrypted data, and I think. Right, like we've been doing these network assessments for a while, right? Packets don't lie. When you look at the network, you can actually see what's there and what's not and how it's working. And it's always universally people are surprised by how much traffic is actually unencrypted, right? And this is like, well, I've listed some protocols here for you that are naturally unencrypted, Telnet, but LDAP's got a encrypted version. But if you leave the unencrypted port open, then who knows, due to misconfigurations or legacy, right? Perhaps there's been an acquisition recently, unencrypted traffic, right? Number one reason, 46% of traffic that should have on the network should have been encrypted that isn't. That's like a stat that we would routinely in that sort of ballpark run into. Obviously, there's obsolete algorithms. We've talked about these many times, but I want to point out, or like at least have you pay attention to the obsolete suites in general. One thing that we have seen is that we started with SSL. You got SSL2, you got 3, you got TLS 1.0, right? There's been an evolution of cryptography suites. That evolution isn't because somebody wanted a new version. That is because encryption has evolved, right? Encryption was working, and somebody figured out a way around it. Perhaps like, it was weakened, and new versions of cryptography, additional algorithms, hashes, key exchanges have been added, right? That was to address a need, right? It was to address a risk. Computer networks have a way of degrading, right? There's some natural degradation. Older software sticks around, appliances, IoT, what have you, things that haven't been updated, right? So older versions of cryptography stay around, and they may not really be in your visibility or zone of control, right? So that happens. Other problems we see, right? We were just talking about that before the webinar. Right? People have root certificates in their organization with super long lifespans, and that's signing everything. And we don't even know who installed that anymore, right? Self-signed risks are obvious, but misconfigurations are also very common. We manage the certificate, but the software isn't actually using that certificate. It's using some other thing that was on the host in a different path, right? So those are all things you're going to miss. Closing this topic out, right, are sort of, perhaps you would consider them esoteric vulnerabilities, but think about encryption and encryption algorithms. They may be mathematically strong, but it's software. These things have been implemented in code. New code still has an average of 20 bugs per 1,000 lines, right? And in cryptography libraries, we work those out, but they remain, right? We've seen the Java ECDSA bug and numerous others, right? We had the Heartbleed vulnerability. Encryption is code, right? Is software. And then finally, right, let's talk about those mathematics, right? At some point, we discovered that, or we realized that the way that RSA and Diffie-Hellman algorithms were working were all mathematically very closely related, and a quantum computer could potentially defeat those if sufficiently scaled, right? So by no means is encryption, right, a monolithic and well-organized thing. There's many single points of failure, and there's many ways in which that can go wrong, and you don't know what your particular poison is going to be until you discover. Anything I missed, guys?
Well, I guess I'll add a couple things. You touched on a couple of those things already, Vince. But with cryptography, anything that communicates on a network basically today is using cryptography somewhere. It just sort of works most of the time, and so it's ignored. But I think a lot of these things on this list are the sort of thing that can fail. Like, you could be using the wrong algorithms or the wrong key sizes or reusing keys over and over again, things like that. And from the outside, it works fine. It looks encrypted, but is horribly insecure. And I think that's all of this stuff, at least a lot of it, can fail silently in ways that leave you vulnerable, but you'll never know. I guess one other thing I'll mention, I think the TLS 1.3 at the bottom there, quantum vulnerable, might be a misprint. TLS 1.2 is certainly quantum vulnerable. TLS 1.3 actually is gray area. The TLS 1.2 is not going to get updated for the new NIST quantum resistant standards. TLS 1.3 will. But going back to another point that you made, Vince, which versions of libraries are out there actually matters, because some versions of TLS 1.3 are going to be quantum vulnerable and some will not. And so paying attention to all that, actually now, it's all this stuff. I think we're entering a phase where all these sorts of things that we used to just take for granted underpin everything, and they're all starting to change for quantum and other reasons. And so now we all have to pay a lot more attention to this stuff than we have over the last 15, 20 years. The other one I'll mention is SSH keys, also not on here, but like certificates get a bad rap for expiring and so forth. And of course, we in the PKI world have done a lot of work to try to make sure that there's automation and things to stop certificates from expiring. SSH keys don't expire. That actually creates a bigger silent problem, because what effectively happens is you wind up with all these keys that are good forever. Some admin sets up elevated access to a server with an SSH key pair, and then they just sort of live on. And so you wind up in most organizations with huge numbers of SSH keys allowing access to servers without even really great knowledge as to where those connections might be coming from, who has access to the private keys that correspond to the public keys. But no one wants to turn them off, because there's a lot of business critical processes that are also using them. So like just knowing which keys are in use, which ones are now dead and can be turned off, is a massive management problem that you just need. Most organizations need a lot more insight into what's going on there. We could talk about the slide for an hour by itself, but
we could. This is the webinar right here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said though about when cryptography breaks, does it make a sound? It's almost like that, the old adage, tree falls and no one hears it. No one's around to hear it. Does it make a sound? I mean, if cryptography breaks and no one sees it, does it make a vulnerability? Yes, it does. It's just that often we don't see it, and there's no red alarms that are, wailing when these things happen. They often happen quietly, right behind the scenes, and that's why you've got this iceberg here showing that a lot of these things often go unnoticed. Some of them might be more obvious, like an expired certificate could take down a server and you've got an outage on your hands, but many of these other ones don't necessarily have that level of visibility. And that really all points to one problem, which is this increasing and building amount of cryptographic debt in organizations today. And that really becomes an even bigger problem as we transition to post-quantum cryptography. I mean, for those of you, I think most people on this call are probably pretty familiar, but as quantum computers, of course, continue to develop, mature, their ability to crack encryption that we use today becomes closer to reality. And we don't know when that day is, but we do know a few things. And we know that attackers are motivated to steal and store encrypted data today to decrypt it when a powerful enough quantum computer does become commercially viable. We know that government agencies and organizations like NIST have already set timelines to deprecate the use of current encryption standards, even those that are considered secure today. I think we've gotten away with leveraging the same algorithms for many years, just upping the key size. That's no longer the case. And we know that new quantum resistant algorithms are also available. They're already being tested, already being implemented within the tech ecosystem. So this really brings us to the second full question of the day, which is, we want to know, where are you on your PQC readiness journey? So in other words, how is your organization preparing for the transition to this entirely new set of cryptographic standards? And your options are, we've not started planning or preparing yet. We have some internal discussions going on, and maybe we've started to plan. We've taken steps to consult with vendors, and we've already taken steps internally to begin preparing. Or you're actively testing and implementing solutions to ensure that you're prepared. And that last one, by the way, that doesn't necessarily have to mean that you are implementing the new PQC algorithms. We know that many systems don't natively support those yet. It could just mean that you're exploring or implementing solutions that are going to help you on that migration journey. So would love to know, maybe Vlad, your perspective on this one before we see the results. What do you think the results are going to be compared to a lot of the conversations you're having out there?
So I think vast majority of response are going to be around 2. That's what we're seeing around, our clients. And, one thing to say, about a year and a half ago, whenever a client would come to us and say, we formed a PQC migration team, we have absolutely no idea what to do. That still may be very happy, because I'm like, you're thinking about this problem. This is so urgent, and there's so many organizations that are not thinking about it at that point in time. I mean, today, almost every organization is thinking about that, but them actually already starting to form a team, although having no idea what to do, that was already great news. Today, yeah, I would say it's roughly around around the two. There's a lot of discussions internally happening around the organizations. They're trying to understand what steps to take. I think they're gradually moving on to 3, but it's a firm 2 at the moment.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say, well, it's something that's coming, but we don't think we really need to be out in front and leading this, this charge. Like that concerns me a little bit, just because, I guess going back to the SHA-1 to SHA-2 migration, which those of us with gray hair do remember, kind of late, 2009, 10, 11, in that range. It took from the time that SHA-2 became a standard to the time that most organizations were off of SHA-1 was about 12 years. If you talk about the NIST guidelines for deprecating RSA, we don't have anywhere near that long. And so it's got to happen a lot faster. To me, if you're not already at 2 or 3, as Vlad was saying, you're way behind and probably are not going to make it. Not to be a doomsayer, but it's just it's a lot of work to get all this stuff migrated.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. So there's the answers. There we have it. So yeah, we've got a solid 2 there. I'm a bit surprised to see 25% at we've not started planning or
I
preparing
appreciate
yet.
the honesty, quite frankly. A lot of people, it takes guts to say that, right? Even anonymously.
We will be following up with each of you.
Kudos.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I think it's actually a pretty even split across those 3, and certainly 2 is leading the way. But not surprised to see those answers. Happy to see, though, that a good number of people are starting to test and implement solutions that are getting them prepared for that journey ahead. But wherever you are on that journey, let's talk about what that path to readiness looks like. And we've put together an admittedly overly simplified roadmap to quantum readiness, including some of those key steps that you'll need to take along the way, right from educating your teams all the way through to deployment and then the ongoing management. So Ted, I think this is another webinar-worthy slide of its own. Could talk for an hour on this one, but let's just talk through some of these critical steps and things that folks need to start thinking about. And then, let's open it up to conversation, Vlad and Vince as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think we do get asked a lot, and Vladimir touched on it, right? Is what should I be doing now, right? Because like there isn't a version of Windows out yet that supports the quantum resistant algorithms, although they've announced that they're working on it. Same thing with Apple, Android, mobile phone. There really isn't a lot of implementations of these algorithms available for you to deploy inside your organization that can understand this stuff. Keyfactor can issue certs that are quantum resistant, but right now there isn't much in your environment that's going to understand them. So what can you do in the meantime? Obviously, we've talked about education and so forth. Clearly a lot on discovery, which we're going to get into in a minute. Automation, I think, is a big piece where you're not, by the time you actually can start deploying these things in your environment, you're not going to have that long before you start bumping up against the NIST deprecation deadlines. And so getting as much automation in place so you can pivot very quickly is super important. And by the way, the CAB forum is transitioning over almost the same time frame to 47-day certificates. So there's a lot of reason to build out automation, at least from a PKI perspective, in that realm. The big blue box, talk to your vendors. That was actually one of the things in your poll question. That's another thing you can be doing now. I can say that we have now started getting questionnaires from our customers and prospective customers on, tell me your quantum roadmap. When are you going to support this? When are you going to support that? What's your plan for supporting both legacy algorithms and quantum resistant at the same time? And starting to get those not just to cryptographic vendors like Keyfactor, but really any vendor that produces anything that communicates on a network is going to have their stacks updated to handle all these new algorithms and protocols and so forth. You can't move as a customer until they move, right? And so getting that inventory of your entire vendor supply chain for your IT environment and everything that comprises it is a critical piece, because that's going to tell you what you can migrate and when. And obviously then you can start building out testing, so forth. Again, there are folks, there are some HSMs now starting to have support for these algorithms as well. So you can actually start building out testing, seeing what works, what doesn't. Key sizes are all a lot bigger. There's a lot to learn just from trying this stuff, playing around with it in a lab. And then obviously once you get to the point where there are things in your environment that do understand the algorithms, you can deploy manage and continually monitor your migration as you're moving across to the new algorithms. So made it sound really simple. There's only in this picture some sort of two major bends in the road, but in reality, there's going to be a lot more than that.
One thing I'll add to that, Ted, I think is that like we've seen migrations in cryptography in the past, right? Like, you know, you spoke about, right? Like SSL, TLS, like various versions. Like one thing that quantum is forcing is it's forcing people to take a more proactive approach, right? Like actually thinking about it. Because when we think about management, right? Like it's not likely that this is a one-time ordeal. We're going to move to quantum safe algorithms. Now we're done, right? Like it is, and NIST has hinted at that, right? We're going to see additional algorithms, and a diversification of cryptography algorithms actually makes sense. So when you have more than one of any one thing, you'll need management, right? You need visibility. You need to be able to turn the knobs, and set a policy and implement that policy, right? And I think that's the change that we're really seeing, and that's what quantum is driving.
That is a great point. Like David Hook, or the head of Bouncy Castle, has said, like don't think about this as RSA to MLDSA, right? It's a transition to a new way of thinking about cryptography, and as Vince just said, we all may have to migrate to something else sooner, right? There's a lot of algorithms coming out. And so it's not going to be just one to choose from. It's going to be a host. And knowing which things are supported by which platforms and so forth is actually going to be a problem.
And to add a little bit more, like it's probably first time in history we're seeing in terms of cryptographic standardization, where the standard itself is agile. It's growing, it's increasing, there's changes happening to it. So, we have purely standardized algorithms, but we know this is not the final list. And it's important for us to ensure that we're able to adapt to whatever the future is going to bring. And I think it's probably first time NIST is experiencing something like this. Usually, you'll standardize, a block cipher. Okay, great. We standardize block cipher, AES, good to go. Here are the 3 parameters. You're done. With SpeakQC, it's a completely different story. And again, time will tell. And so we need to be prepared for anything. And the mathematics is way more complicated than what we're used to seeing. And just to bring up one example why we have to be ready and flexible, let's take a psych, right? That was a round 4 candidate. Round 4 meaning that it's one step away from being standardized, and it was broken at that stage. So that's why, the level of flexibility, and this is why NIST is trying to make sure that they're not placing all their eggs in the same basket, that it's everywhere. So it's a really complicated process. And in that roadmap, you'll see realistically cycles within cycles of doing this. But in order to be able to manage it, the old approach that we've been using for the past 30, 40 years is no longer going to be applicable here because we're just not going to be able to manage that. So therefore, the whole mindset, as already been mentioned, needs to change how we approach cryptography and the cryptographic changes in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one way we've often described it, one analogy we use is like it's like the move from gas to electric, right? This is an entirely new fuel that now needs to be accepted by all of the infrastructure that you leverage today. It's not like we're moving from standard to premium fuel. We're moving from gas to electric. It's entirely different, and ensuring that you've got all the right pieces in place is going to take time. I mean, look at that industry moving from gas to electric vehicles. It's going to take years to get to that point. And there's plenty of bumps along the way. So an important thing to recognize is that, first of all, the road is definitely, as you said, Ted, it's going to be bumpy, it's going to be windy. But secondly, these steps, I think it's also important to recognize that they don't happen in perfect sequence. You can certainly do a lot more before step 6, which is really when you start to implement these. There's plenty that you can do today to start preparing. But these don't happen in perfect sequence. It starts with discovery, but there are plenty of steps that you can take kind of concurrently as you're starting to prepare. But there is one step, again, that really does need to happen and to logically move forward. It's kind of a dependency, and that is discovery. So we want to zoom in on that discovery step and what does that actually look like? So Keyfactor InfoSec Global CipherInsights, they've all contributed in many ways to standards and guidelines out there around post-quantum migration. As an example, Vlad, you were one of the contributing authors to the NIST special publication 1838B, did I get that right? Which provides some guidance around migrating to post-quantum cryptography, specifically around cryptographic discovery. And Vince, I believe you actually put together this diagram, you helped put together this slide. So let's talk more about that discovery step, what's involved in that process and what tooling do you need to kind of make that happen? And Vlad, why don't you start us off and then we'll open it up.
Sure. Yeah. So, NIST has been standardizing, the PQC algorithms, but coming to a realization that PQC migration is probably the most complicated migration we yet to live through. They've literally started a separate track, which talks specifically about the migration itself. And one of the first important steps that was identified is actually around discovery. So, part of the NIST and CCOE, they've brought collaborators together to work on this to understand how do we actually do this whole discovery, because it all starts with discovery. Discovery is the first step to identify all your vulnerabilities. Now, if we look at it from various steps, and probably Vincent will talk a little bit more about the lists here, but if we zoom in into analysis and risk assessment, one thing to identify what is a current risk for today, and what is the current risk for tomorrow in terms of being quantum safe. One thing I always ask is MD5 quantum secure, right? So, and all of a sudden we start realizing, well, we got a bigger problem there, because MD5 is insecure today, but as we're mitigating quantum risk, that must be taken care of as well, because there's no point of moving to SLH DSA, for example, and still using MD5 at the same time. That kind of kills the point, even again as of today, if you're not even talking about 5-10 years down the road from now. So again, important to understand various use cases, because not all the data is, and not all the cryptographic assets are distributed in the same way, in a nice standardized ways, etc. Another thing is you might not have access to all the cryptographic assets that are even within your environment. That's why it's important to understand what kind of cryptography is actually inside your third-party applications. So it's important to understand your binaries, your sources, your network, etc. All of it needs to be covered. There's actually way more cryptography to be discovered than you can probably anticipate.
Yeah, and I want to add to that another aspect here is that, and NIST has got this concept right. What we are about to embark on is a journey that is something new for the enterprise, for the government. This is not, we had intrusion detection, we're getting better intrusion detection. What we have here is a new problem that we've not been thinking about properly maybe for the last 20 years, and that now needs to actually start being addressed. And when you think about change management in the enterprise and in large organizations, the very first step on change management is trying to understand and gain a consensus group around the problem that is to be solved, right? Everybody needs to start talking about something as, this is a problem that needs to be solved, it needs to be prioritized. We need to think about how we're going to approach this as an organization. All organizations are differently. And if we don't have actual numbers, right, and a problem to point at, it's very, very hard to get that support, that executive support, and that group of people that care about this problem. So discovery at all its aspects is, and with that, the risk assessment that obviously naturally needs to follow, is the very first step in that change management to get the organization to think about how are we going to take a proactive stance and build out a new capability in here where we start to move to actively managing the cryptography, how we feel about it, what posture we want to take, what risks we want to mitigate, et cetera, right? So it's the kickoff in that thinking process is where discovery is at.
Yeah, to me, there's a couple of things that are important here. One is discovery means a lot of different things. There's a lot of different places to look for cryptography. Just things like, what's shown on the left side there, code development applications, what's actually on your network, all of that sort of thing. Every different place you look gives you more information and information that you're going to need to plan out your migration. Prioritization and assessing where you're at is going to be huge, just because most of these environments, the amount of cryptographic data that you're going to find is immense, right? So focusing on the things that are protecting the most important assets in your environment is a critical piece, right? Move those things first. Things like prioritizing against capture now, decrypt later. This is not kind of an all at once sort of thing. It makes a lot more sense to sort of tackle it based on the things that are going to protect your biggest risks.
Right. I also like what you mentioned earlier, just about the people problem, right? I think there's kind of two groups of people. If you oversimplify it, there's this small group of people that actually understand cryptography, often a PKI cryptography team. And then there's a much larger group of people who understand the applications or own the applications that consume or use cryptography. And it can be really difficult to bridge the gap between those two. So I think visibility or discovery is a key step in bridging that gap, bringing that understanding to the people who understand cryptography, but also how those applications, those hosts, those components of infrastructure can actually consume it in a way that makes sense for the teams that manage that infrastructure. Okay, so to recap, we've talked about current risks and vulnerabilities. We've covered the transition to post-quantum cryptography ahead and the importance of discovery, of course, to address both current risks and then that future transition. Now we're going to bring it all together and talk about why Keyfactor brought together InfoSec Global and CipherInsights, and really what these solutions are capable of, and more importantly, how they come together to provide that complete cryptographic discovery and visibility. So we're going to have Vincent Vlad dig deeper into how each solution works in just a few minutes. But first, Ted, why don't you give us an overview of how these solutions work and why they work so well together to enable discovery?
Yeah, and we started looking, we had customers starting to ask us about deeper discovery. Obviously, Command does a very good job at discovering certificates. It looks in lots of different ways. It talks directly to your certificate authorities. It can go query your endpoints like, web servers and F5s and network equipment, all that kind of stuff. But what we realized very quickly is that, like I mentioned in the last slide, the more ways you look, the more things you'll find. And the more information, even if it's something you've already discovered, you'll find more information about those things. And so this is just, to me, the perfect pairing of InfoSec Global does an incredible job at going very, very deep at the cryptographic asset level in terms of things like endpoints. So scanning file systems, cryptographic libraries, scanning code, and really understanding, like literally what version of Bouncy Castle are you using, what version of OpenSSL. This looks like a piece of code that's creating an MD5 hash. All those sorts of things. Super important for understanding that piece of the puzzle. CipherInsights is tuned toward actually watching your network on a continuous basis and seeing what's actually in use, right? So on one hand, you can kind of see what systems are capable of. On the other side, you're actually seeing, okay, that's the proof is in the pudding, right? Of like what's actually going around on my network, what protocols are being used, what cipher suites, what algorithms are being negotiated to. All that stuff is absolutely critical as well. Of course, all of this plugs in super nicely to things that Command already does as far as automation and remediation and so forth. But this is just incredibly deep discovery paired together, I think is just super powerful, and why we're so excited to bring all of this stuff together under one roof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then when we talk about what that actually enables, you kind of hinted at it, right? The discovery is the first step, but also understanding what is that risk. It's like you've turned the lights on in a really messy room. Now, what do I actually do with this mess? It's understanding the biggest risks in your environment, where they lie, and prioritizing them, being able to address them, that cryptographic debt that we talked about, but also quantum vulnerable assets as we move forward. So I think that's a key piece of it. And then you mentioned remediation. I think that's the hard part, right? Going back to the messy room, that's the part no one wants to do. I don't want to clean up that room. I just wish it would clean itself, but we got to do it. So I think that's a really critical step. Keyfactor also addresses a core component of that, which is the certificates, right, Ted? Like being able to reissue those certificates, automate those processes so that process is much smoother and not disruptive to the business.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just to keep that analogy going, right, this is very much like turning on the lights in a room, whereas before maybe you're looking with a flashlight, you can see a little piece of things, but not everything, not all at once. You also don't want to turn that light switch off. So I think that monitor piece can also go at the end, right? Or there's a loop back to the beginning of this whole process of IT environments are not static, right? Things change all the time. New systems are introduced, new keys get created, new certificates get issued, new code gets deployed. All of those things can affect your cryptographic posture, both positively and negatively. And you need to keep doing all of this to make sure that you're remaining compliant and where you want to be cryptographically. So I think this, it's a critical piece of just, this is now. It's a process that we're all going to have to keep doing on a regular basis just to make sure that we are transitioning and staying where we want to go from a cryptographic posture standpoint.
Right. Yeah. So now let's talk about those two pieces. We talked about how they fit together. Vlad, why don't you dig a little bit deeper into what InfoSec Global's specifically AgileSec Analytics does? And then Vince will have your side of things with CipherInsights as well in that real-time monitoring.
Yeah. So the cryptographic discovery or AgileSec Analytics, the discovery is of the core cryptography, right? So there's a lot of security tools out there that are looking at various security measures. But again, as been already previously mentioned, cryptography has been always looked as a black box, a scary one actually, and that's why a lot of people are scared to even look at that. And this is exactly the covering of this gap to find all this cryptography. Now, cryptography is everywhere, right? It's used for network communications. It's used on end hosts. It's inside the HSMs, CI/CD pipelines, and the tool goes really everywhere. So end host, networks, CI/CD pipelines, HSMs, KMSs, etc., to find all the cryptographic artifacts. Now, to recap what the cryptographic artifacts are, so that's certificates, that's keys stored, algorithms, protocols, libraries, so any type of cryptography in there. And the tool, not only it's able to find cryptography in a direct way, it would actually be able to scan absolutely anything, regardless if it's a cryptographic file or a not cryptographic file. And if there's cryptography baked in there, it will be able to discover that and tell you what kind of cryptography is there. Another thing is that it's able to go and do the binary scan, because you might have a third-party application or maybe you don't have even access to the source code for whatever reason. So it pretty much does reverse engineer in the fly. In a sense, to figure out what kind of cryptography is baked in there. And it's important because when your vendors are providing you with cryptography or with applications that, of course, are, in 95% of cases are using some type of cryptography, you want to be able to understand what that is because it is running inside your environment. Once those cryptographic artifacts are found, then they are categorized. And among what you're finding, you need to look at current vulnerabilities as well as your PQC readiness or quantum risk assessment, depends on which direction you kind of look at it from. So you want to look at things saying, okay, this is secure, this is insecure, this is mediocre. And insecure meaning you really need to take care of it today. Immediately, it's a current vulnerability, things as we already kind of mentioned, like MD5, SHA-1s, or maybe DES, etc. Other side is you want to take a look at it from quantum readiness perspective. And so the tool is capable of telling you which components are going to be quantum vulnerable. Of course, that could be algorithms, or maybe keys belong to algorithms, maybe libraries that contain quantum vulnerable algorithms and that we would have to remediate. The tool actually does a little bit deeper dive into this as well to categorize that with the number of logical qubits needed to break various types of cryptographic artifacts. So that way it would help you kind of build a roadmap of what needs to be migrated first among all the quantum vulnerable schemes that are discovered. And another thing to mention is that the tool also checks the compliance profiles. You might need to follow various compliance profiles. Maybe you want to check against how compliant am I against CNSA 2.0 standard, for example, or against HIPAA or PCI DSS or anything along these lines from a cryptographic point of view. And this is quite vital as well, because one thing is being secure, another thing is being compliant. To bring a little bit more extreme example, let's say you're running this tool within a highly regulated US organization. What happens if you find a Chinese cipher suit? It might cryptoanalytically be considered secure, like SM2 or SM3, but that's going to be completely out of compliance for your organization, bringing risks. So that might not be a vulnerability, but that would be a risk to your organization. So that's another view that the tool is providing.
Awesome. Thanks. And then, so we've talked about the discovery, talking about where that cryptography lives, Vlad, understanding the risks around it, assessing those risks, and then being able to start remediating those. Now let's talk about cryptography and use. So Vince, what does CipherInsights do that's unique from what InfoSec Global is finding?
Yeah, unique and complementary, right? And that's I think one thing that we should look at, right, is the fact that systems as designed isn't always systems as implemented. And by taking a network perspective on cryptography, we can see what's actually as implemented, right, as systems are using that. So on the simplest way to think about it is we communicate on the network, right? But there's a lot of different places where that communication takes place, right? And I've listed some here for you, right? Like there may be physical networks, there may be cloud, you might have data centers, you might have branch offices, right? CipherInsights takes an approach where we can capture all that network traffic from wherever it may be, and then create a view that is real time and continuous. Why is that important? Well, systems may be unmanaged, right? Like you might have systems you didn't know about, systems you didn't think about. Other people have carried devices in that are using cryptography or lack thereof. Systems have been configured to be in the management, but are somehow they're misconfigured, right? Like we're missing that. And most importantly, and let's not forget that one, right? There is and Ted mentioned this, there is a significant number of devices that are not yet going to be able to be taking quantum safe algorithms. As we move to sort of an active management and of encryption and quantum readiness, there will be stuff that breaks. Right? Taking a look at what devices are down negotiating their encryption, potentially running old versions, we can make a categorization of what will work and what will break, so you can get ahead of that and don't end up with surface outages. So all of that's visible on the network, and that's a great complementary view to the things you may not yet know about that you weren't seeing on endpoints and elsewhere. So
one other great point on this slide, right? One of those things on the right side was unencrypted traffic, right? Unencrypted traffic. You don't need a quantum computer to be able to read unencrypted traffic. But it's a weakness, right? And so and there's way more unencrypted traffic probably on people's networks than they might suspect. So just being able to see what's actually going on is, no matter what the capabilities of systems are, but what's actually happening is just super important.
Mm-hmm. And then Vince, I did this slide just for you. This is your favorite. So I like what you said about complementary. This is the complementary slide. Let's talk a little bit about these two angles, maybe just for 1 minute, visibility and why that's important.
No, thanks, Ryan, because people that have been attending my webinars for over the years have seen me do this one before, right? Like, the story here is very simple. Things look differently from different angles, right? Why do we believe that multiple vantage points, right? Because we basically listed for you every possible data source from which you can get cryptographic visibility, and Keyfactor's bringing all of those together. And here's the answer why, right? Like, and the answer here being is that Ted lost his keys and he obviously suspected my dog. How are we going to figure out this, right? Different vantage points, right? Like the MRI, the X-ray reveal different things, right? This is why your doctor has different diagnostic methods. You have different ways of looking at it. The Tetris block on the left here is a great example of that, right? Like you have radar, you have infrared, you have visible, you have etc. Why do we take different vantage points and as many different vantage points as we can to the same observed environment? That's because we see different things in different lights, and we can then discover vulnerabilities and weaknesses before the adversary can. So that's the point I think we want to make here, right? Like, diversify that visibility and you stand the best chance of taking true control over your cryptography.
And I give you credit for resisting making the horrible pun that you can find keys anywhere, right? This just illustrates that even more. So.
I wanted to leave that one for you, Ted.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Vince. I really do.
I love it. Yeah, thanks, guys. So we've talked about visibility, the importance of discovery, even if those keys are inside your dog, wherever they are, understanding where cryptography lives and how it's being used. So these technologies are clearly very complementary, but also complementary with the Keyfactor stack, right? What Keyfactor is already doing today. So getting that layer of visibility, understanding your cryptographic infrastructure as it stands, but also starting to modernize that infrastructure when you think about the trust components behind it, PKI being a core component of that, but signing as well, understanding your signing processes, that's going to be a core piece of moving to, as an example, quantum ready signatures. So addressing that component. And then lastly is command. Command does do some discovery as well of certificates, but also the lifecycle automation and management of those certificates, ensuring that you have kind of that centralized governance and control over those critical assets. So together, these are really highly complementary solutions, and why we're so excited to kind of share this with you today. But on that note, it's time for our final question before we get to some Q&A. And this one is really about the next step that you'd like to take from here. So we've really only scratched the surface of cryptographic discovery. We want to know, are you interested in learning more? So, hey, maybe you want to sit into a live demo, actually see this in action, understand how it works or how it's architected, or maybe just even talk to our team and ask some questions, dig a little bit deeper. If that's the case, then option one's for you. Maybe you're not quite ready for that yet, but you want to receive some information, learn a little bit more on your own. We'd be happy to send you some more information there, some content to help you explore this further, and also to kind of build the business case internally. We mentioned that earlier. That's a whole other piece of this, is understanding how do you build a business case. We have plenty of kind of guidance around that. Or maybe you're just good for now, and hey, that's okay too. In any case, we want to know, where would you like to go from here? And then while we're waiting on those responses for just a few more seconds, just a quick reminder that you can submit your questions in the Q&A. We're going to start opening it up. It looks like we've got about 8 minutes, a good amount of time to address those. So looking forward to that. I've seen actually a few come through.
Yep.
So we'll address those, and then we'll close out this poll. So I think we've got a good amount of answers. So I think we're good to close out that poll. Perfect. And we will be sure to follow up with you if you were one of those people who said, hey, I want to see this thing in action. I want to understand how it works, or just talk to our team, or send you assets. We'll be sure to follow up on that.
Yeah. One thing we may want to start with the Q&A, because I think there might have been some confusion just looking at the Q&A. Like these new products, the CipherInsights, AgileSec Analytics, these are now part of the Keyfactor family, right? Through acquisitions that were announced a couple of weeks ago. So there was a question on which Keyfactor products. It's these Keyfactor products, effectively, we're talking about. Obviously, we're going to be working as quickly as we can to integrate all this stuff into the rest of the Keyfactor suite, where those integrations make sense. But super excited, if you had not heard the news, to be bringing this amazing 2 sets of technologies. Actually, InfoSec Global has 2 different products, so I guess 3 sets of technologies under the same roof as everything that Keyfactor was already doing today.
Yeah, on that note, there's actually a good question here around how do these new capabilities integrate with the rest of Keyfactor's existing products?
Yeah. Yeah, there is actually already an integration between InfoSec Global, AgileSec Analytics, and Command. It will extract the certificate information from Command. InfoSec Global has a really nice way of sort of ingesting cryptographic information from lots of different sources. Command is one of them. We, of course, will be working very hard to have information flowing in the opposite direction, and also, of course, between CipherInsights and AgileSec and CipherInsights and Command, et cetera, all those places where those things make sense to hook all that stuff together. So, again, the ink is barely dry on this deal, but super excited. We are now, just getting rolling up our sleeves and getting to work integrating all this stuff. But can share more on the longer term plans probably in another month or 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question on that note too is just, will these new capabilities be available separately from Command? I think you kind of already addressed that question, but
yeah, they will. I mean, I think people, there are people who want to do discovery, and or maybe they use a different certificate management product. Maybe they use eGBCA in the same way that when PrimeKey and Keyfactor joined forces a few years ago. We don't force people, if they're using eGBCA, to use Command to manage those certificates, or vice versa. Same sort of thing here. The discovery capabilities will be available, as their own unit. I do think it makes sense for CipherInsights and AgileSec Analytics to go together, because they do fit extremely nicely together in a very complementary fashion. But those will be available separately from Command, but certainly also will integrate well and package with Command in certain fashions as well. Of those things, I think we know at this point. There'll be a lot more coming, of course, as we move forward.
Right. Okay, so we've got a question here. I think this one is probably good for both Vlad and Vince. What type of infrastructure do you need to perform discovery? Is it pull-based or agent push-based?
So for AgileSec Analytics, we actually support both. But to do the end-host discovery, the agents, or actually we call them sensors because they're a bit more lightweight, we would need to be on an end host to be able to find and analyze and discover and report back to the central server where central server, within your premises, all the findings that it is doing and pulling the data. Now, one more thing to mention on that note, we have our own native sensors that can be deployed to discover. But if you're already running things like CrowdStrike or Tanium, we can leverage those existing agents to work with our tool, which would formally not require you to deploy our agents in that case.
So
Yeah,
no
and I
net
think
new, basically, if you're doing that. That's a super important distinction. Yeah.
I was just going to say, CipherInsights, it's an analogous story, right? The network traffic capture, right? Networks are often very tree-like in nature, right? So the places where organizations choose to first start monitoring are usually the places of convenience, right? If, for instance, if backup brokers are already installed or there's an easy place to place a tap, that's one, right? You grow that out as it goes. There's integrations with any number of tapping technologies out there to make that as easy as possible.
Yeah, so I think we've addressed this question. There was another one in there. Can the discovery tool use input from other network analyzers if they're already being used within the organization? The answer is yes. There was another one in here around, oh, hey, I like this one. What sort of partnerships is Keyfactor open to? This collaboration beats our competition. Love to hear that. So appreciate that one. We'll make sure to follow up with you on the partnership front there. But I think we had another question here. I'm not sure where this one was asked. There was a question about other protocols like SCEP or EST. Where do those land in this stack ranking?
Yeah, I can answer that. Actually, my understanding is that, and just goes back to, there's tons of protocols that use cryptography, right? SCEP and EST are two of them. There's a lot, and all of that. Not only do just the specifications themselves need to be updated. PKCS 11 needs to be updated to have a specification for the new quantum resistant algorithms, so that you can choose them for HSMs that support them. That is, I believe, still in draft, but is almost done. My understanding is that SCEP and other cryptographic experts may know this better than I do, so feel free to weigh in, Vladimir, if you know. But my understanding is that SCEP actually, there's something about SCEP where it actually can't really be updated to be quantum resistant. If that's the case, then you're kind of stuck. You won't be able to really use SCEP. You're going to have to use something else. EST will, of course, have to get updated, as will Acme and anything else that handle those things. There's standard work going on all over the place between the IETF and the X9 group and a whole lot of other standards bodies internationally to come out with new standards for all of these things, to have support and specification and so forth for these new algorithms.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted. We've got a ton of questions. We definitely will not be able to get to all of them here, but I'll ask just a couple more. So we've got one here. To what extent or level of visibility should one achieve for cryptography to get actionable insights? I.e., do I need to compile an exhaustive list of cryptographic assets, or should I focus on understanding the dependencies on these cryptographic modules, applications, and systems?
It's a good question.
Well, some of these things are driven by compliance requirements, right? Like if you have PCI DSS requires, right, like full cryptographic inventory of all in-scope systems once a year, right? So there's that. On the other hand, right, like full cryptographic visibility is a journey, not an end destination, right? Like you will, because networks change, organizations change, right? New systems get added, different pieces of software get added, decommissioned. Trying to figure out where your priorities are, right, is a risk assessment, right? Which is exactly what these products give you, right? As you gain that visibility, you get that priority list.
Yeah, and to add to that, to create that priority list, you do need to first get your exhaustive list of cryptography, and among that, through filtering, prioritizations, etc., you'd filter to something that is most important to be actionable first, right? And this is one of the things we also do, is that we understand that if we find over 1 million cryptographic artifacts, that's way too much. Nobody's going to ever try to manage all that at the same time. By doing multidimensional analysis, how critical it is, where it was found, etc., we'll come back and say, you know what, here are the 300 items from that 1 million you really need to look at first, and everything else can wait.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, we do have plenty more questions that we could answer, but I want to make sure that we leave on time and leave you with the insights that you were looking for today. So appreciate everyone joining today, especially our speakers. Fantastic insights. And we will certainly continue the conversation. We'd love to dig deeper with you, so certainly can reach out. You can also check out this link here on our website, or if you just go to keyfactor.com, you'll find it right away on the top of the page. You'll see a link that goes to a page that describes all about this acquisition, including videos from everyone you see here today, as well as some other materials, solution briefs, et cetera, that dig a little bit deeper into the solution. So again, thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate the time, and we look forward to continuing the conversation as we move forward.